Good morning, everyone. We're going to give it a minute or so, and then we're going to jump right into our presentation this morning on the 2023 Economic Impact Study of Public Transit in the state of Missouri. So thank you for those of you who are joining us and jumping on right now. Good morning. On behalf of Citizens for Modern Transit and the Missouri Public Transit Association, I'd like to welcome you to our 2023 report to the community on the economic impact of public transit in Missouri. Before we begin the discussion this morning, though, please join me in welcoming CMT and MPTA board members who are online with us today. Thank you for your support and commitment to transit in Missouri. These studies would not be possible without their commitment to ensuring we have the latest data, research, and information on public transit. Last August, the MPTA and CMT announced they were partnering to commission this study. The goal is to help quantify the impact of public transit access on the economic viability of the urban, suburban, and rural communities throughout the state, which in turn plays a critical role in securing state and federal funding for public transit. The current study that we're talking about this morning built off a similar study that we completed in 2019 to define the current public transit landscape, rider demographics, and spending by transit agencies across the state, which also helps to measure the economic impacts triggered and reinforced by public transit across Missouri. And I think that you're going to find the findings from this report this morning really, really relevant and really important to our conversation about state investment in public transit. Transit systems across the nation receive approximately 40% of their annual operating budgets from their respective states. But this is not the case in Missouri. Despite significant wins in recent years, including a 580% increase in transit investment since 2021, Missouri is still trailing other states at 11.7 million annually. In fact, transit providers across Missouri get less than 3% of their annual operating budgets from the state itself. Whether people choose to ride it or not, transit should matter for all Missourians. So today we're going to hear from Bob Lewis, an independent consultant and assistant professor of urban planning and development at St. Louis University, who led this study with his team. I think that you're really going to find some valuable information provided. Following Bob's presentation, we're going to hear from a local panel of respondents on the importance of this study. Our panelists this morning include Adam Kazda, the Vice President of Governmental Relations with Greater St. Louis, Inc., Frank White III, CEO of the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority, which is one of the largest urban providers in Missouri, and Denny Ward, Executive Director of SMTS, which is the second largest rural provider in Missouri and in the country. So we will definitely leave time at the end of this presentation for questions and comments, though. First, though, let's jump right into the findings of this study. I'd like to welcome Bob. Bob, great to see you this morning, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Kim. I'll work with Travis here to get my screen shared. And however that's done, make sure I got the right one here. Let's go to the top here. And let's make sure I got the right one up here. I think I do. You never know. Okay, here we go. And I will broaden that out. And thank you all for having me here. As Kim said, this is the second time we've been through this. We did a previous survey, same questionnaire that we sent around to all the transit agencies 4 years ago, each of them covering a 5-year period. So I have an overlap of the year 2019. I've conducted a lot of these sorts of studies over the years, transit agencies, nonprofits, corporations, and so forth. And they're very valuable for a number of reasons that Kim's has pointed out already for organizations, not the least of which is raising money, but also strategic planning, publicity, and so forth. So let's run through what we did and what we found out. The key thing we looked at here is the limits of this study, if you will, the economic impact of the transit industry and all the statistics and trends in the transit industry. The survey that we conducted asked a lot of questions for over a period of time. We have some trend data. I'm going to talk about the combined total, the aggregate of those trend data for the state transit industry. By the way, that industry covers in one way or another transit support in every county of Missouri. So that's a good sign. And if anybody, some of those agencies have already asked for what we call drill down reports or mini reports about their own trends and impact, and others can do that as well. We've produced a few of those reports. So that's what we're going to talk about today. A reminder, if you long forgot some of your fundamental economics classes, over on the left, I'm simply pointing out that Missouri transit industry, agencies, so forth, puts a lot of money and jobs into the economy of Missouri. Some of that money leaks out, so we lose some of it, but every time we spend money or a transit agency spends money, it creates income for somebody else. Income for those of you who work for the transit agencies, those of you who are customers of the goods and services they buy, or businesses, vendors, and so forth. People who earn money, spend money to support their households. As that happens, it creates more income for further down the line, and you get this ripple effect through the entire economy. Because some of that money leaks out every time, each round of spending, it leaves the Missouri economy. Sometimes we spend our vacation money overseas, for example. Eventually that initial spending goes down to zero. We keep spending, of course, keep renewing that spending, but because it goes to zero, there are ways to create finite multipliers. And the multiplier numbers, I'm going to give you the big summary right up front, the big answer for the entire state for the average annual numbers of the 5 years between 2019 and 23 aggregated for the respondents to the survey. So over 40 million riders on an average year. The riders themselves, because of and attributable to their rides, spend another $480 million. So that money is inserted into the economy. Almost 3,900 jobs are supported in the agencies that responded, and direct spending by the transit agencies amounting to well over $918 million a year for labor expenses, compensation, for buying goods and services, and for capital expenditures. We're going to go through some of those details now to get a sense. So what we wanted to learn in the survey was what he spent. We asked each of the agencies what they spend, and then we, through literature review and other research, figured out probably what the average spending by riders is that we can attribute to their rides themselves. One of the questions is like, well, where do they get the money to spend that? Well, partly they got that money to spend it because they have jobs at the end. They're not spending money on cars and parking and so forth. So there's extra money to attend college, to get to the medical attention they want, to buy stuff. And then there are multipliers. We've got the multipliers through the big federal government computers that do this on a county by county basis and ran them for the whole state. And out of that, we're also able to estimate what that multiplier effect is for state tax revenues, so that our legislators can get a sense of what's the return on their investment when they help out. So the study we did, kind of a repeat for the most part of the 2019 study, which looked back to 2015. We asked respondents to give us data for all those years. On the top, we asked again in 2023, and there was an overlap of 2019. So we've got basically a 9-year picture here that I'm going to really focus on that in the graphics we're going to show you here. We asked about how many riders do you have every year? Have you had employees you've got and so forth. So the numbers I'm going to give you here are averages for those, well, in this case, the 5 years each, and on all those points. So nobody is quite revealed here, though we can do that too if somebody really wants to learn specifically what some agency did. So a 5-year study, but overlapping also with the previous 5 years, gives us a bit of a trend line. I think you're all aware that the pandemic didn't help us any in the transit industry, though you're going to see some signs that maybe we're getting out of that, and some capital money came in. Response rates, we had 34 members of the Missouri Public Transit Association in the 2019 study. 19 responded. This time there's a couple of fewer members, but a higher response rate. Pretty good, but also not 100%, though we got the big ones. So a lot of those who didn't respond aren't going to contribute that much more if they did respond to the numbers. In any event, consider that the study we're looking at here, the numbers are about these respondents, not extrapolated to try to reach 100%. We're talking conservative numbers here, in other words. So we're not dealing with trying to make up the numbers for, say, that other 31% that didn't respond this time around. So a less than 100% rate, we're conservative. So let's just look at riders over time. The 2019 numbers, by the way, here were not averages. So these are the actual numbers we got, are the results that came in from the recent survey, not using the old survey. Because in 2019, last time we did the study, people were guesstimating what their annual numbers would be. This time they had real numbers because they'd already been through now 2019. So you can see a decline in ridership. In fact, about half. We're about half what we were in 2023 as we were in 2015. Not surprising to those, but you look at the end of this and say we had a big drop there, attributable in many ways to the pandemic. But are we coming back? One can start to make that case and so forth. But there's a lot of you're going to see a lot of capital investment to help make that happen. Employees within public transit agencies actually grew for a little while in the old study and then dropped. The 2019 drop that you see there is pretty severe, relatively speaking, statewide. By the way, I put in St. Louis and Metro Kansas City because they're the big ones, the biggest ones, and you get a sense of where the scale of this sort of impact is happening. But again, every county in the state is covered by at least one transit agency to serve those who need transit service. That drop in 2018 to 2019 looks like it was almost budgeted, planned on, because we didn't have the pandemic effect then. And it continued downward. We've seen some leveling off, however, in recent years in employment in the transit agencies. We're treating transit industry kind of as a business here in the state. It's a business because it employs people, it provides services, it buys goods and services, it makes capital investments. So thinking about it in that way gives us a sense of how important it is as a business and, of course, to the customers that it serves. So employment, while I'll go up here again. Riders went down 49%. Employment went down only 13%. Now, what do we attribute that to? Probably we need to keep a certain number of employees just to keep routes open and options. It's just that our buses and trains and so forth aren't as occupied as they were before, but many of those routes are still available. We didn't have to cut all of them. That's a stress on revenues. Employee compensation. Now, all the dollar amounts in here have all been translated into 2023 values, even going back to 2015. So we kind of level the playing field here. You can see that employee compensation certainly declined as employment went down, up and down, what we saw before. But kind of oddly, it went up in the last year. To a point where it's more or less equal, maybe a little bit more on total compensation than it was way back in 2015. A lot of that's attributable to trying to attract back and retain good employees. Big news stories about having a hard time getting drivers and so forth. So a lot of bonuses, compensation went up in the recent year to support the transit system so it could grow back. We're going to see a little, so there's only about a 1% change, but good news is you get a good paying job, generally speaking, if you join a transit agency here in Missouri. Average employee compensation, that is, dollars per person, has gone up substantially over that period of time as well, particularly in the last year. We saw certainly some declines. We had the transit industry had to deal with that pandemic challenge, fewer riders, all that was going on. But that's a struggle when things are starting to come back, as we all know. How do we get them back? Good employees, and some of that's been in higher wages, some bonus payments, and so forth. So in these days in Missouri, it's if you get a transit job, I'd say take it. Non-labor operations, these are the goods and services outside of labor that the transit agencies purchase. We all have to do that. A precipitous drop in 2019. That's why I think there was almost like a statewide budgeting concern about what spending was going on. And it's continued downward, although inching upward again. I think probably as ridership has risen, we need more services and so forth. So we see in that sense also a big drop, but a leveling off in the last 5 years to maybe a more stabilized, sustainable. It'd be nice to see growth if ridership can also come back and so forth. The big surprise to me anyway, because I'm paying that much attention, was the substantial growth in capital investments. A lot of money in recent years spent on what you all as transit agencies would call capital investments. That would be facilities, certainly, vehicles, that would be major expenses and so forth. They were a little bit sluggish relative to the recent past in the previous survey. Good, bad, not enough money, so forth. But given the challenges of the pandemic in the general economy, we all received, sort of some free money from the Congress and the president. A lot of resources came out of the national government to make sure the economy didn't fall apart during and post pandemic. So we see a lot of that happening in the infrastructure, in the capital investment field as well. And Missouri transit agencies have taken advantage of that. So spending a lot of money in recent years on capital investments. Ideally, that will lead to more sustainable capital equipment that will encourage more ridership. Hey, modern buses, better trains, all that sort of thing, as part of the marketing campaign to get more people back in the transit system. So you get an idea, we've had a huge increase. From an economic impact point of view, we had some declines previously we talked about. The capital investments have helped reboost that impact in the state. So we've had a pretty sustainable economic impact. So overall time, these are adding all those three expenditure categories together by the transit agencies themselves. Again, 2023 dollars. We've seen growth in what the transit agencies are spending. Again, spending for labor, spending for other operations, and spending for capital investments. A reminder of the economic impact of spending. Spending by me creates income for you, and then you spend it, it becomes income for somebody else. Jobs get created, goods and services get created as well. I'm not going to make you study this graphic, but this is in the report. This is the main table. It summarizes all that spending at the top, and then the multipliers we use down below. And then you can see, if you can see it, there's an output line under total economic impact, the state of Missouri, about $4 billion in economic impact in the state. Those details are in the report, and how to read this table, there are instructions as well. But one of the also amazing things that Kim hinted at before was a previous study, which we did, 2015 through 2019, Missouri state contributions to state government to transit industry, fairly low, relatively speaking. I think relatively speaking, it's still fairly low, but a vast increase in that. So to keep consistent with the use of averages in this, we took the average of the last 5 years, 2019 through 23, to then create a basis for what the state has done. We can calculate a return on investment. If we look at 2023 alone, which I'm not going to do here, that return on investment is also pretty valuable, and the state's helping out a lot. So the overall rate of return down the lower right is now about a 10 to 1. The state puts in a bunch of money, about 5.11 million, a little over $5 million, an average for those 5 years, and got back on average 50 million, $51 million in taxes as people earned income. You have to pay income taxes. People buy stuff, so there's sales taxes. There's a relationship to the corporate tax because, well, we're buying goods and services from businesses and so forth. And Missouri sets it up very well with a lot of the data they have to make this modeling quite transparent and easy to understand. In the end, a rate of return to the state treasury is now 10-1. They're putting in $1 and getting back $10 in effect in taxes to return to that. So closing up, transportation is one of those things, well, we get from here to there. The roads work, the buses work. We can walk, we can ride our bikes, but when it's not really there or it's not funded right or things look bad, we think about it a lot. We take it for granted. We probably shouldn't. And part of the reasons we can justify not taking it for granted is just noticing that economic impact that helps all of us in the state to have a much more diverse economy, diverse ways to get to work or to shopping or to school and so forth. So thank you for your efforts in many of you for providing the survey results, and I look forward to comments and panelist questions and so forth.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you so much for the data. For those of us who were here in 2019 and are here again in 2023, despite the pandemic, we saw an increase from 3.67 billion annually on the state to 4.05 billion. So we are moving in the right direction as we increase investment in public transit in the state. And I think that that's something really critical we need to be talking about. So thank you, Bob, for that overview to get us started this morning. So now I'd like to welcome our panel of stakeholders to respond to the info, and then we will leave time for questions. I see that there's one question in the Q&A, but please start adding them as we go to the Q&A or the chat box, and we will get to those after our panel does their opening remarks. So let's welcome again Adam Kazda, Vice President of Governmental Relations with Greater St. Louis, Inc., Frank White, the third CEO of Kansas City Area Transportation Authority, coming to us from Washington, D.C. today, and also Denny Ward, the Executive Director of SMTS, which again is that second largest rural transit provider in Missouri, but also in the country. So welcome to all of you. We'd like to give you a couple of minutes, starting maybe with Adam this morning, to respond with your initial thoughts, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. So Adam, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, thank you, Kim and Bob, for your leadership on this issue. Everyone on this call, of course, knows how important public transit is to the long-term success of the St. Louis Metro, which we represent, Greater St. Louis, Inc., and the entire state. As identified in the STL 2030 jobs plan, the first jobs plan for the St. Louis Metro region in a decade, public transportation is essential to inclusive economic growth. Public transit reduces barriers for residents in historically isolated communities, connecting them with greater access to healthcare, education, and opportunities, all of which are critical to growth, not only in this metro, but the entire state. That's why Greater St. Louis, Inc. and CMT have partnered up over the last few years to increase public transit's budget in the state budget in Missouri. I think the economic impact study only bolsters our argument in Jefferson City that public transit is important to the state and its long-term growth. For every dollar, as you heard Bob say, for every dollar the state invests in transit, the state receives $10 back. That's a huge return on investment, and one we should continue to shout from the rooftops. One of the points in the report that I was surprised by was that Metro triggers about $2.5 billion in economic activity every year and supports $560 million in household earnings and over 10,000 jobs. Behind those numbers, are real people and families, and the access that transit provides, as well as the jobs that transit provides, is really key to inclusive economic growth. So looking forward to the Q&A, Kim. Thanks.
Thank you, Adam. Frank, would you like to jump in and give your perspective from one of the largest transit providers in the state, what your thoughts are on these economic returns and how that impacts your daily doing business?
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Thanks, Bob, for doing this. I've said many times in presentations that the KCATA is an economic development agency that happens to run transit. We cover 7 counties and 2 states. And we really, I've tried to emphasize since I've been in CO that transit is infrastructure. It's key to workforce growth. It's key to economic development growth. And quite frankly, the ATA, I'll speak for the ATA alone, we've not carried a big enough stick. And what this information does is allow me to swing really, really hard. When I start talking to the business community, legislators, to Adam's point, we're looking at what, $640 million of our impact, $120 in spend from transit riders, almost 4,500 jobs. And quite frankly, like I said, we're 7 counties in 2 states, and we're really being driven most by Jackson County. We've really not taken this to the other 6. And so the potential to grow, we're doing a lot of work on the transit development side, which is going to have a huge impact on those numbers as well. Obviously we got a World Cup now. We know the number of games now. And so now all of a sudden everybody loves transit now. So ideally, if we leverage this right, we can have a lot of investments and really get we invest in what we value, Kim. So to the quote that was shown before, you don't miss till it's gone. And so we as an industry, and you are in the forefront, in the front lines for sure, with what the work that you do, there's really got to tell with some swag and tell our story and really say we matter. Similar to what Adam says, we have our 4 pillars of access: education, employment, healthcare, and housing. So transit fits in everywhere. And I think this information, this data, it's data impact, it's data informed, and allows us to tell a better story. When I go like in DC, I can say, hey, this was going on in Missouri, and we're underfunded. And here's the numbers that show that we're underfunded as a whole. And it's not just because I say so. And so I'm a big data guy. So this is, I read it last night, I read it this morning. I'm high. I got all these notes here I've written down and everything. So, it's exciting for me because, like I said, I came from the Eco Devo side at the ATA, and I'm all about the numbers. So this is great stuff. This is the stuff right now with the window that we have from the investments in DC, from what you guys have done in Jeff City for the MPTA. I think it just helps tell a better story.
Thank you, Frank. And literally, I just had this conversation on social media this morning. Someone was asking us what our tagline used to be because it's still relevant. And it was transit. Some of us ride it, all of us need it. And I think
Exactly.
one thing that wasn't even touched on in this report, Bob, that we could even delve further is the amount of investment we're seeing around transit that we didn't even touch on, as well as access, the number of jobs that people are getting to using the transit system. So there's always more data we can mine, but this is a really good start. So Denny, last but certainly not least, let's turn it over to you as the executive director of SMTS, the 2nd largest rural provider in the state and the country. What do these numbers mean to you, and what are your initial thoughts?
Well, we are constantly interfacing with our legislative branch to promote the fact that transit is valuable in rural communities as well as it is in the urban areas. We've found that our counties that offer rural public transit are growing in population. The people who are retiring to these areas are looking at the next level of care that they're going to need. So they're checking the infrastructure to say, is it possible for me to get to the medical facilities from where I live? Our main office is located in Madison County, which our office is in Fredericktown. It's 100 miles to major medical facilities. We provide transit into St. Louis, Missouri, 5 days a week in order to accommodate major medical needs. Without these numbers, it's hard for me to go back to investment people and especially our voting public and say, we are relevant, we are valuable. I know that we're rural. We have one county where we have one vehicle, one driver that pretty much covers the entire county. It's just that densely populated. But in other areas, we have been able to launch a deviated fixed route, which is now connecting a lot of things together. So now in 3 counties, we're offering deviated fixed route, and we're starting to look at where is this model going to work in other larger rural counties for us. So these numbers definitely will give us the opportunity to be in front of the public, in front of our legislative people, and in front of those who question the validity of public transit and the value of it. We employ 200 employees roughly in 21 counties. So these numbers are great for us to be able to substantiate what we do on a daily basis. And I really applaud you for taking the lead on this, Kim, and making this a priority. And Bob, your team is amazing. These numbers are super. This report is dynamic. And I really feel like the other 2 gentlemen, we can take this to the next level by having substantial information that we can back our statements with. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Denny. And I would say this is really the leadership of the Missouri Public Transit Association, why we're here, as well as Citizens for Modern Transit. But thank you. So Bob, let's jump into some questions for you and our panelists. But the first question is, when you're talking about annual salaries, 88,400, what are the positions of the public transit services that are paying 88 for? So could you clarify that number a little bit for everyone that's on the call this morning?
I don't know. We simply asked for total compensation. The survey and our purposes were not to get to that kind of level of detail. So I don't know. The survey doesn't know, and I didn't ask. So all we know is that grand total aggregate number, which is easy to divide by employment and see what's going on. One suspects that the executive directors or whatever are paid well. Anecdotally, you'd think a number of drivers are paid well. Because, and I say that because you see the advertising here in the St. Louis area anyway for needing more drivers. It's a good job and attracting and retaining them. But beyond that, I couldn't tell you. That doesn't mean that Frank can't tell you what's going on, or Denny within their areas, if they want to reveal that.
So I was just gonna toss the ball to Frank and Denny. You want to talk a little bit about what you have had to tweak or change since the pandemic to ensure you can bolster your operator base with regards to salary and benefits?
My first thought when I saw them was I first thought of operators.
Yeah.
I mean, our average operator here in KC ATA makes about 85 grand. You know, now we came in August 2022. We needed operators, and so our board reopened the CBA specifically on compensation with Local 1287, and I think we went from 17 starting to, I believe, $24 an hour plus retention bonus and different things. We've managed to hire over 150 new operators since then. We're about 314. Need to be about 340 to be fully staffed. So June Berry, who's our senior director of HR, she's got the secret sauce, and we're getting them in, as well as mechanics. I mean, I'm sure everyone had the issue with getting mechanics. I think they're at $33 an hour trying to get qualified mechanics. So the bulk of our cost actually is going to be on that maintenance and operator labor side. We're probably, of our 600 employees, only 120 are considered what are salaried or administrative. The rest are all labor. So it's a total. It's really, that's where it's driven. Our costs are driven on the labor side, because I mean that's where we're paid to do, right? Is to move the folks, and so we've made a decision at leadership to really try to invest and attract and retain. That's the bigger piece too, retaining those operators. When I came 8 years ago, the ATA, we had guys that are 35, 40 years still driving, and so we want to make sure that we keep that going. So that I would say from our end, that's where I think someone puts there at the aggregate number, but that's the total average is what we see.
Thank you, Frank. So I do want to jump in really quick and let you know that June Berry's secret sauce is a part of a different webinar we did a couple months back. It is available on the MPTA website if other providers are on this call and want to figure out what she's doing, KCATA has some real wins with regards to operators and rebuilding their team. Denny, did you want to say so? Did you want to jump in as well?
Oh, I sure can. Of course, rural Missouri is much different than the urban areas. And so but again, our employee base is driven by our operators. And during the pandemic, we saw a lot of these people who made the decision. We employ a lot of part-time people who have retired from another job, and they're using this as supplement or something to keep their hands occupied and out of the wife's hair during the day. So they're working for us, which is wonderful. But during the pandemic, they made the decision that it was too risky for them to be exposed to the virus. So we had a lot of those people who just permanently retired and decided not to come back. Then we found we had to compete in the market for these jobs. So we had to look at our rates of pay and benefits and how we could make this job more attractive. And we've been able to do that. So I'm like Frank. That's what drives our organization. And I always tell our operators whenever we do interviews or whenever we're commending them or doing training sessions or whatever, that they're our front line, they're our face. The administrative people like myself who sit in the office and make the governmental decisions and write the grants and whatever are not the face to the people that we serve. These operators are key to us, and so we have to take care of them. We want to take care of them, and that's where our investment is at.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So next question. This is probably, Adam, this is probably directed to you first. This is probably your bailiwick, but what is the key message here from this study that you think will resonate with the Missouri legislator? We've made funding strides in the last 2 years, significant funding strides in my book. I say it all the time. Someone said it's peanuts, Kim. Yes, but it's 580% more peanuts than we had 3 years ago. So what do you think key messages coming out of this study will help us at the state legislative level, Adam? And what can people do to get on board and help as well?
Yeah, thanks, Kim. I think, when you look at the report, I think, and Bob's great presentation this morning, I think you can see that there's more room to grow, that the more investment that's put in transit, the more riders, and the more return on investment for the community. And I think that pitch to the Missouri legislature, has been awash in federal funds for several years now. We're coming out of that, and I think the state's going to be looking for investments that's going to return to that budget, and a 10-to-1 return. That's something that cannot be ignored. I think the advocacy with Greater St. Louis Inc., MPTA, CMT has been fantastic. And for folks on the call that want to get involved in some of this, we're going through the budget process right now. We were very fortunate to put in a lot of the hard years over the last few years to even get transit in the governor's budget. Fortunately, we were in there at the level that we wanted. So, we'll be playing defense for, versus offense, which is a good thing for folks that don't know. And so if you want to get involved, I think contacting myself or Kim and just using your voice, people, legislators want to hear from their constituents, what their concerns are, what their needs are. They're very hypersensitive to the voters in their districts. They want to feel like they are serving, their communities. So your voice definitely matters. So I'd say, definitely reach out to us if you'd like to get involved more.
Great. Thank you, Adam. So, and Adam underscored something that's really, really important. So this is the first year the governor has actually recommended 11.7 million or any transit investment in his budget recommendations that came out in January. So we are moving into this session for the first time playing defense rather than offense. So that's exciting to start off with your foot in the right direction, but it's always a fight until the end of session. The other thing, and Adam touched on it as well, is your personal stories are just as important as these economic dollars. So return on investment for the state of Missouri. So when you're a constituent and you reach out to your elected official, whether they're in the House or the Senate, they need to hear your personal stories, whether you're a rider, an operator, or a business owner who's impacted by public transit. So we really, really hope that you will consider reaching out on behalf of public transit to your electeds, but this information is just icing on the cake for us to be able to tell this story. Frank and Denny, I didn't want to cut you off. Did you want to add anything to that with regards to your messaging to legislators? And I know, Denny, you did touch on it a little bit when you had your opening remarks.
I think Bob had mentioned earlier about looking at like a business. One thing I've been telling my team is we have to manage our agency like a business anymore. We know we're not private, obviously, but the fundamentals are still the same. And we have to go and tell this, again, this story as well as it is. I've actually just listed now, I've been writing down notes here about a roadshow, with the chambers, Rotaries, the business community, really taking this information and keep the technical, but tell a story. You mentioned personal stories, and really get out there and get after it. Just because, again, we have to be our best advocates. I always joke and say, well, we all know that broccoli is better for us, cheeseburgers just taste better, right? And so we have to decide. We know transit's better, but how do we tell a better story and become better storytellers and say, okay, this is why it matters. And I think the personal stories, while the people will understand the technical data, they'll be moved by the story. And so how do we tell a better story where people, they buy an emotion but justify by fact later. And I'm an old insurance sales guy, so that's how I sold it. It was like, but we just got to we got to look at all the stuff, the costs, all these things, and really say, okay, I'm sure Denny does it. Where can I invest more? Where I get a better return more? And really, and this stuff just helps us. I can't overestimate how awesome this stuff is, because I didn't come from transit. I came from the private side. I think sometimes you come up in transit, you kind of locked in that transit blinder. And I'm like, no, we got some really cool assets here. We can go leverage and go tell the story to. And I'm a Star Wars geek, so like Yoda would say, unlearn what you've learned. And we go out and we do what we need to do to get people to move. Because I think we're transit, where we go, we grow. You've proven that, Kim, with spending the time in Admin Jeff City by going and going and going and going and going. Now it grows. So we've got to be a little bit more aggressive, I guess, because defense is the right. You don't want to lose to God. So, like I said, I don't come from public transit, but I become a public transit geek and the Kool-Aid drinker. And I truly believe in what we do. And I think we got a great story, a great product, and we can't sell that strongly enough.
Great. So Frank, may the force be with you. So let's, Denny, did you want to add anything to that?
I'll just make one other quick comment. I encourage our counties, our drivers and coordinators, scheduling people. They receive a lot of phone calls from individuals who call to say, we couldn't manage mom at home if you weren't there to provide the transportation piece. Encourage those people to put that in writing for you. Don't just accept the verbal, thank them for the verbal, but ask them to please go ahead and put that in written form. And that gives you so much validity whenever you get in front of these people who are making these vital decisions for what's going to control our budget. And Adam, again, thanks for that statement about defense, because I really, really do like that. And I feel like, as Frank said, we have a good product. And I feel like it's up to us to leverage that product to make it continue to work for us through MPTA, CMT, and the other organizations throughout the state that are working hard to make transit an important piece of everyone's daily life. So thank you so much.
Thank you. So Bob, next question. And I don't know that you addressed this in the study, and so this might go back to our panelists, but I'm going to start with you. Have you seen economic impact change based on mode share, types of transit and travel options available? So I don't think that we got down to that granular level, but I want to give you an opportunity to weigh in.
Also got granular with your jargon there. I don't understand half those words. Load sheet, oh, yes, I do. No, we didn't. One of the things I probably should have added earlier is one of the challenges with surveying cats, herding the cats to get them to respond in any survey situation, not least of which is the MPTA. We want a maximum, we wanted good numbers, and we wanted people to participate. As probably everybody on this webinar knows, that's hard to do. So we tried to keep the questionnaire as simple as we could. So we asked for the big numbers, not the details. And so getting down to that kind of a level, Kim, we didn't even try to do so that we could get a maximum return. When you ask even, well accounted for transit agencies for more details, it's more work. You got to take time. It's an effort. It's this, that, and other. So trying to minimize that, we didn't ask those kinds of questions. So the answer is I don't know. There is some review in the literature that might reveal that, and the full report has a lengthy bibliography of literature we reviewed to get more insights into these economic and related impacts. So there might be something in one of those. Refer the questioner to the report to look through that bibliography and see if maybe something there can help. Unless Frank or Benny or somebody has an answer. Yeah.
So just a reminder, the report will be available online on both the Missouri Public Transit Association website and on the CMT website this afternoon, along with the recording of this conversation. But Frank, there are multiple different modes of public transit in KC right now in your service footprint. Do you want to weigh in on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the chart from 2016, you have to, recall that's when the streetcar line opened, May of 2016. And so that's something that affected, and I don't know if Bob's was extrapolating those out. I know we look at our numbers, we pull the streetcar out because while they aggregately count, it's still a separate entity. We also saw the advent of the ride share in that window too, that has affected that, plus just different work patterns. Obviously the pandemic had an impact on that. And then this last year, we've been kind of going in and out with microtransit for the last 7 years too. We have a program called Iris with the city. And so, we're still trying to convince our partners at the city that we want to keep microtransit micro, because it's really a precision type of service, not necessarily a broader service. Ideally, you want it to lead to more freight routes to kind of lay that groundwork. So it's really trying to manage those different modes as well, because they do move riders away. As you know, the streetcar extension will go to the plaza in 2025. We just have now got the final funding for the streetcar extension to the riverfront. So you're going to see more ridership on that. That will affect bus, because we're taking buses off of Main Street. So it does have an impact. And I'm kind of talking kind of broadly here though, Kim, but we do know those different things happen, and that's okay. It's just how you get there doesn't matter to me. Just use any one of the services, but it does have an impact on what's perceived as traditional transit stuff.
And I actually, go ahead, Bob.
So just the separate report we prepared for you just on KCATA does not include the numbers for the streetcar. It can be, but I left them out at this point. That would add another 1.5 million riders a year, and so forth. So that impact is bigger than what we've given you, but it's certainly in the report.
And I think that this could actually be a topic of an entire other webinar. What does investment look like around our public transit modes across Missouri? In St. Louis alone, I know East West Gateway is working on TOD metrics. So that's transit-oriented development metrics. How many jobs are within a half mile of our light rail stations? How many housing units are within a half mile of our light rail station? We have talked about that it's really important to start to quantify the development, how much has been invested in development around light rail in the St. Louis market. What we do find is that there is more investment around the permanent infrastructure, things like a KC streetcar or a light rail system that can't move. Whereas with a bus system, the bus route can be changed quarterly if they wanted to on what the route is, or every 6 months or annually. With the permanence of rail, we see more investment with the permanence of some of those systems that people know are not going to move in the next year or year and a half. It adds to that catalyst for development. You know, we're seeing a new development going in at the North Hanley Metrolink station. That's been a huge win in St. Louis. This is a mixed use housing development with services and retail, and that's an $18 million investment that you'll see. There's conversations around other stations. So I think as that's a whole topic that we can touch in another webinar, and I think it's really exciting. And like I said, when we started this conversation, this is not the end all be all in research. This is just what we need to continue the conversation, but we can always expand on this. There's other factors that play into public transit, and we talk about it all the time. There's the health impact. You know, we're looking at potentially what is the health impact of having access to public transit in a community versus not having access. And Denny touched on it a little bit when he was talking earlier that many of his rides to the St. Louis are medical based the entire time.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
the benefits are endless. It's one of the good things about our jobs here at Citizens for Modern Transit and the Missouri Public Transit Association is that we can continue to shout from the rooftops that the benefits are extensive. And so this is just one area. And I think the transit mode split, that's a conversation we could have, and the investment dollars that follow that. So, and I know Adam, in your 2030 jobs plan, I think you touch on the expansion of light rail. And one of the reasons is the investment dollars that follow. I don't know if you want to add anything there.
Sure, Kim. Yeah, I think, transit is just so important. The expansion of transit, you mentioned the STL 2030 jobs plan. We think a lot about, talent in the business community, right? How are we attracting talent from elsewhere, and how do we get talent off the sidelines? A lot of young talent are moving to metros that are accessible, that have transit systems that are expansive. We want to capture that, and we want to capture as much young talent as possible, and also activate talent that is on the sidelines. So, for folks that don't have access to transit, expanding those transit options, will allow more people to seek employment and grow our economy. So I just think it can't be the underscore of transit is just so important to the growth of not only our metro but really the entire state. And I think Kansas City would agree with the same.
Yeah, I'd like to add. I mean, I came from the TOD side of the KCATA. Actually had the honor doing the very first development project for the KCATA in 2021. We've probably done over probably $300 million worth of projects with 2,000 housing units, mixed income, on some on streetcar lines, some on bus rapid transit lines. We're actually looking at land management, land assemblage, different things of that nature on our corridors, and working with private developers. Actually, the one we just did called the Mohawk, actually building the bus stop within the development itself. So it's actually part of the development, because we don't have the light rail like you guys have down in St. Louis, Kim. We got streetcar. I get asked every day when light rail is coming, and I just say someday. But the TOD thing is huge, because what we're trying to achieve in KC is density. KC Mo is a city built for transit. You look at the historically, you have 300 different streetcar lines, private lines, and so the bones are there. And so we're trying to use our compact tools, really kind of do some things to the bi-state with their compact. There's unique things we can do as well. And it's really attracting a lot of, we kind of de-risk development in some place, because we can acquire the properties and because we can do the comp bonds financing to make it less risky, so to speak. But it drives ridership, and people want to live around access to transit, be a streetcar, be a bus, what have you. We're just trying to get people to at least have the choice to not have to use a car if they don't want to. I was really cool when I was in St. Louis last August to see the new redesign stop you guys did out in East St. Louis, Kim. So it shows the possibility of what can be. So I mean, I'm all for TOD or TOC as they call it now. I think that's the future of transit. Kind kind of take our cities back and get our communities back. We built it on trains before. Let's just go backwards and go forward.
Right. Thank you. So Adam, there was a question just added, and I'm gonna let you speak to it. What is the ask to the legislature this year?
So as Kim mentioned, 11.7, that's, correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, that's 10 million in general revenue and 1.7 for the state transportation fund.
That's right. That's right.
So that's the total ask. So the 1.7 is pretty much all but guaranteed the way I understand it. So, asking your legislators to hold the governor's recommendation of $10 million in general revenue for public transit, that's what we're asking for. And that gets split up between all of the agencies in the state. So that doesn't just go to Kansas City or St. Louis. That gets split up between everyone. So that's available for every community in the state.
And Adam touched on it. 3 years ago, we were at 28 cents per capita investment in public transit. We are now at $1.89. Part of the strategy behind the 11.7 million ask this year is, we want to make sure that we can maintain that before we take a step forward and push for more. Not that we're not pushing for more every day, but we want to make sure that we can solidify that 11.7 million as much as possible as that moving forward as not a new funding item. We have conversations behind the scenes all the time. We're shooting for Nebraska. That's 19.9 million annually. We got to keep pushing here. And we know that 11.7 again is not enough funding for public transit, but we want to be smart about this strategy and make sure that we can ensure that we don't take 10 steps backward back to 1.7 million. And that's part of the conversation that happens behind the scenes of why we're at 11.7 million. There's one other point, Bob, and I want to turn this back to you, but I think your report really underscores the fact that public transit is a major employer in this state. And do you want to touch on that a little bit about the numbers that you saw? And it's not just a major employer in the urban areas, it's providing jobs in our rural areas that may not have been there without it.
And I think Denny reinforced that rural part. It's a great provider of jobs, not necessarily full time, but something else to do to provide a service to the community that, just about all of us want to give back in some way when we're doing well. And so a great way to do that as well. Yeah, broadly speaking, transit is labor intensive. You need the mechanics, you need the operators, and so forth. So we need a lot of good, skilled people doing that, and it's a tremendous, labor. We need a tremendous labor force to be able to do that. So it's a very important job creator. The overall impact is, almost 4,000 jobs in the state directly attributable to transit agencies, with a multiplier effect beyond that, and they pay well. So it's a really important job source, and it's labor intensive. To reinforce that we can't. Well, maybe one day we'll have driverless buses and trains. I don't know. People movers do that. The streetcar could probably be driverless, like riding an elevator. But at the same time, you need people on board to take care of the people who are on board, as well as to make sure that there's somebody nearby for any kind of an emergency, or I need directions to something. You need a human being on board. And that's also very friendly. I think Frank was saying how important it is to have the frontline workers there. They are ambassadors to the transit system and to our cities. To the services they provide. They're the ones that are there. So having, people really having those jobs is very critical to the transit industry.
So we are just about at time, and I want to thank all of you for the information you've provided this morning. But I always like to close these webinars with one question to all of our panelists, because I think it's really important that people leave with one or two ideas that they've learned from these conversations about public transit. So from each of you, what do you think is the key takeaway for our audience this morning about the importance of this study and these numbers? Bob, would you like to start as our researcher?
Well, to me, certainly focusing on the economic impact, I guess there's a $4 billion impact in the state of Missouri's economy that has a huge impact on household income. That $4 billion is part of our GDP in the state. It's a really big, important part of that. And contributes, of course, to the diversity of the economy, which is also important for sustainability of the economy and the ability to suffer through recessions and handle growth in the economy. So think $4 billion. Yes, we're going to go to the state with a 10-to-1 tax benefit, but we also need to go to the state and say, hey, you're putting in this many tax dollars, but you're getting a $4 billion impact on the state's economy. That's and the number of multiplier jobs, which is close to 30,000. Let's sell that.
Thank you. Denny, since you were the one to give the last opening remarks, would you like to go first on your takeaway?
Sure. I would say that my takeaway is data doesn't lie. So many times we're in front of these people and they're saying, can you prove that? Well, now we can. Data doesn't lie. Take that with you.
Thank you, Denny.
You're
Frank?
welcome.
Yeah, I'm going to lean more to Bob. I mean, we're big business, and too often we're marginalized as if we're coming with our hands out asking for. No, we deliver. I've actually got to meet with our city council in Kansas City, Missouri next week, and I'm going to say, hey, we bring $240 million to this region, and we got 4,100 jobs. So give me more money, because I can give you more, because those are your constituents. Those are people going to work. That's a tax base in Kansas City, Missouri, that I can say 10-to-1. There's return on what we spend, and that's hard numbers. So I'm going to be that guy. We'll see what happens.
Perfect. We want you to be that guy. Adam?
Yeah, I'd say from my perspective, leading our government affairs shop, make sure when you're talking with local, state, federal officials, let them know how important transit is. You've got the talking points now. The most effective way to move policy is by word of mouth. If we're all speaking with one voice, we can produce great results.
Thank you. Thank you again to all of our speakers this morning and all of you who have joined us. This information will be available on our websites, both the Missouri Public Transit Association and Citizens for Modern Transit. And as Adam said, please consider using this information and your personal stories when speaking with your elected officials. The collective voice is so important when we're talking about investment in public transit, not only at the state level, but also at your local level and the federal level. So, Frank touched on, he's in DC today talking about public transit in Missouri and across the country. Really important that they hear from constituents. So please, help us tell the story of public transit. Look for the entire report. Thank you so much for your time this morning, and make it a great day. Have a good one.